Few names are as closely linked to the history and performance of the piano as that of Frédéric Chopin. Chopin composed a rich, diverse array of piano music that ranks among the most performed in the classical music canon. As a pianist, his skills are reputed to have been prodigious, and his compositions helped to set new standards of technical and creative mastery for the piano. In this edition of Liberty Park Music's Composer Bio series, we will discuss the life and music of Frédéric Chopin, illuminating his pianistic innovations and following in the rich, if occasionally troubled, footsteps of his life. Frédéric Chopin was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1810 to a French father and a Polish mother. His father was an educator, and his mother was the youngest daughter of an ailing aristocratic family. As was common with those of her class standing, Chopin's mother was an amateur pianist, and she gave Chopin his first piano lessons. Chopin then took lessons with a local music instructor, Wojciech Zywny, who had a great influence on Chopin as a musical mentor, if not so much as a pianist. Chopin's early music exposure did not focus on technique exclusively specific to the piano, which helped him to develop his own unique approach to playing. He was known as a child prodigy and was compared to Mozart in his early adulthood. Chopin's first musical publications were released in 1817, when Chopin was only 8 years old. The Chopin family cultivated an educated and lively cultural atmosphere for their children, frequently hosting salons, mingling with the Polish aristocracy and middle class, and traveling to the countryside, where they encountered Polish peasants. As a teenager, Chopin enrolled in the Warsaw High School for Music, a rival offshoot of the Warsaw Conservatory, studying under composer and headmaster Joseph Elsner. The tumultuous political situation in Poland, and indeed the political debacles raging throughout the rest of Europe, severely impacted the trajectory of Chopin's career. At the time of his birth, Poland was occupied by 3 other countries: Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Napoleon Bonaparte had promised to liberate Poland from these powers, but was ultimately defeated, leaving Warsaw under Russian control. Further unsuccessful Polish Revolution attempts occurred in 1830 and 1848. Poland would remain divided until the end of the First World War in 1918, and its troubles would continue through the Second World War with the invasion of the Nazis. At the outbreak of the 1830 Revolution, Chopin was a young man who had just begun to tour Europe, starting in Vienna. There, he spent time giving concerts, composing, and building a reputation within the famous city's musical inner circles. The revolution failed, and as a consequence, Russia began to exert even greater control over the Polish people. Chopin would never return to his homeland, and his choice to compose genres closely associated with Poland, such as the Polonaise and mazurka, were interpreted as a form of nationalism, a major theme of the Romantic period. After his time concertizing and teaching in Vienna, Chopin moved on to Munich, Stuttgart, and finally Paris. Paris in the 1830s was home to a lively milieu of musicians, including Franz Liszt, Hector Berlioz, pianist Frédéric Kalkbrenner, cellist Auguste Franchomme, and the famed singer Pauline Viardot. In addition to these musical luminaries, Chopin's circle in Paris also included politicians, writers, and painters, including Alphonse de Lamartine, Honoré de Balzac, Victor Hugo, Heinrich Heine, Eugène Delacroix, and, perhaps most significantly, George Sand. George Sand was the pen name of the novelist Aurore Dudevant, and she quickly became smitten with Chopin after witnessing him perform. The two sustained a sturdy, if occasionally troubled, relationship from 1838 to 1847, splitting for the final time shortly before Chopin's death. During his relationship with Sand, Chopin split his time between teaching in Paris during the winter and residing at Sand's country estate, Nohant, during the summer, where he spent the bulk of his time composing. From his youth, Chopin suffered from regular periods of illness, most likely stemming from tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, an incurable disease, was common in Europe during this period. Chopin's symptoms were managed with rest and homeopathic remedies up until his final illness in 1849. Surrounded by friends and family, Chopin died in Paris in October of 1849. At his funeral, Mozart's Requiem and Chopin's own funeral march were performed. While his body was laid to rest in France, his heart was returned to Poland, where it was interred in a crypt in Warsaw. Chopin's compositional output was inextricably tied to his pianism, and almost everything he wrote focused on the musical possibilities of the piano. His improvisations served as essential inspirations for the works he penned, and he could not effectively compose without access to a piano. Chopin wrote polonaises, mazurkas, variations, nocturnes, preludes, etudes, sonatas for piano and cello, concertos, a piano trio, and songs. Chopin's piano compositions not only pushed the boundaries of the many genres in which he composed, but broadly expanded the technical and expressive expectations of piano music in general. Influences for Chopin's composition style come from virtuosic piano pieces from the early 1800s, lyrical melodies from operas, and from his early study of counterpoint in Johann Sebastian Bach's preludes and fugues. Jim Sampson, a Chopin biographer, writes that Chopin combined a gift for melody, an adventurous harmonic sense, an intuitive and inventive understanding of formal design, and a brilliant piano technique in composing a major corpus of piano music. Chopin wrote at least 14 polonaises and 58 mazurkas. The polonaise was an aristocratic dance of Poland, and the mazurka was a Polish folk song. Composers before Chopin had written polonaises and mazurkas, but Chopin's compositions elevated the genres to new levels of artistic sophistication. As with the gavots, bourrées, sarabands, and other dance genres that became incorporated into purely instrumental music for listening from the Baroque period, polonaises and mazurkas were meant to evoke particular atmospheres through their tempos and rhythms. Here is the sound of a characteristic polonaise rhythm. And here is a rhythm common to the mazurka. In addition to the polonaise and mazurka rhythms, many of the most identifiable characteristics of Chopin's style can be traced back to improvisation. The vast contoured fioriture ornamentation ubiquitously decorating Chopin's melodies are recognizable as the solidified molds of impromptu elaborations, as are other features such as polyrhythms and melodic variations. Many of these elements are undoubtedly manifestations of Chopin's love of opera, and in particularly the practices of fioritura singers. From a structural and expressive perspective, the music of Chopin blends a freedom of expression with an almost classical sense of narrative. A single piece can possess vast juxtapositions in emotional expressivity, and at the same time still be contained within forms as simple and balanced as ABA. This particular form finds its way into a number of Chopin's preferred genres, as it affords a structural opportunity to present such contrasts. In other cases, such as in several of the ballades, polonaises, and scherzos, Chopin's formal design is much more creative, though no less carefully executed. While in Paris, Chopin stopped giving large concerts, and instead only performed in private social settings. While performers like Liszt and Kalkbrenner wowed audiences with their virtuosity and pianistic pyrotechnics, Chopin's performing style focused more on subtle nuances that were easily lost in large concert halls. Gaining access to a Chopin performance during this time was all but impossible for those outside of select circles, or without a private invitation. Despite this, Chopin's tutelage was in high demand, allowing him to charge exorbitant fees to teach the best of Paris society. In fact, Chopin's reputation became so closely attached to the piano and the private salon settings in which he performed that he became known as a composer of parlor music. This is in contrast to what were seen as more masculine musical genres of the 1800s, such as the symphony or concerto. The combination of Chopin's lifelong struggles with both his health and national affiliation, and his near unbridled creative musical genius, often render him an archetypical picture of the romantic composer in the eyes of historians and musical aficionados. His innovations to the performance practices and genres of the piano, including the incorporation of improvisation into written compositions, the use of modal and chromatic harmonies, and the infusion of folk rhythms and dances into traditional genres such as the polonaise and mazurka, greatly influenced later composers. To this day, Chopin's piano music remains some of the most popular and consistently performed of any written for the instrument, and his influence on what we expect of the sound of piano music is still deeply nestled in the heart of the musical world. Thanks for watching. For more music history videos and articles, stay tuned to Liberty Park Music. And keep an eye out for further entries to our Composer Bio series, in which we'll explore the lives and music of your favorite classical composers. Liberty Park Music offers a number of piano lessons on well-known Chopin pieces. Check out our YouTube page or come find us at libertyparkmusic.com for details.